This is Surfing Through Cinema. I'm your host, Hawaii Harry. Today I'll be discussing the next film for Cinephile Week. From Akira Kurosawa, this episode is all about Rashomon. Okay, so now we'll get into the plot to Rashomon. So, a woodcutter, he tells a curious villager how he found the dead body of a samurai and how he bore witness to that in the court. And the scenery that they're discussing this in is all rainy and it's all dark and depressing looking. And the curious villager, he doesn't really care about any of this. He's just interested in the crazy stories that both the woodcutter and a priest that's with them have to share. And what disturbs the woodcutter, though, about this situation is there are contradictory accounts from others who are at the scene of the crime. And he and a priest were witnesses to these confessions. So the priest and the woodcutter. And then, so the first witness is from the bandit, who's played by Toshiro Mifune. He tells how he lusted after a woman he saw who was riding on a horse being pulled by the samurai. And he claims that he tied up the samurai and won over the affection of the woman. Apparently didn't know who to go with, so she told the samurai, to fight. She told the bandit to fight the samurai, and whoever wins will go with her. And the bandit ends up winning, but she runs away before he could catch her. And so that's the first witness. And then the next witness, the wife tells a completely different story. After the first story was told, the woodcutter looks at this villager and he's like, but this next one is totally different, completely opposite to this one. And so the wife, she says that she was raped by the bandit and that she begged for forgiveness from her husband, who just sat and stared at her. And this totally freaked her out because he's just sitting there. And eventually she, cuts the rope off him and she's like, say something. Don't just keep staring at me. And then she falls over and is completely distraught and crying. And when she comes to, she finds that her husband has the knife in him and that the bandit is gone. So yeah, that's the next one. And again, the villager, he's like, that's interesting. I wonder if that actually happened. And the woodcutter's like, no, there's even another story from the samurai himself. And the villager's like, but how? And the woodcutter says, well, because he used a medium to talk and give his case and give his story. And so the samurai, he claims that after his wife was raped, the bandit asked her to tag along, but instead she kind of menacingly asks the bandit to go and kill her husband because she didn't want, she wanted to hide her shame of it. And then the bandit, he decides, I'm going to let the samurai choose. He's kind of a great guy. And so the bandit gives him the choice of either killing her or letting her run away. And the wife escapes and the bandit decides to free the samurai, and they go their ways, and the samurai ends up killing himself in a more honorable way, and looking at the bandit in a more honorable way. But even after this story is told, the villager, he's like, that surely that one has to be the correct one. But the woodcutter, he reveals that he actually withheld information from the police and the villagers and whatnot in his testimony, because he just did not want to get involved. But he reveals the true events. Well, according to him anyway. We really don't know which one is true, which one isn't. He said in reality he saw the whole thing, not just finding the body. And the true story is the bandit wanted to marry the wife. He's begging on his knees to marry her, but she kept refusing him, and she set her husband free and told him to kill the bandit. Now, the bandit and the samurai were very reluctant to fight each other. They were both kind of clumsy fighters, and it wasn't really that spectacular of a a battle like the samurai had said. I'm sorry, that the bandit had said, or even what the samurai was saying. It was pretty lame of a fight. But by sheer luck, the bandit's able to win. He stabs the samurai. And then the wife, who's just totally freaking out, runs away. And then the bandit kind of limps after her with an injured leg. And so, after all these stories are told, the villager, the priest, and the woodcutter, they suddenly hear the cry of a baby who's been abandoned. And they rush to him. And the villager, he takes a kimono and a jewel that were next to the baby. And the woodcutter's very disappointed. He's like, why would you steal from a baby? And then the villager, he deduces, well, didn't you steal the knife? And the woodcutter kind of looking down, he's like, hey, a thief for a thief, right? And they go their separate ways. And the priest, he's very distraught about all of this. He's kind of lost faith in humanity. But he picks up the baby and starts comforting him. And then the woodcutter, he looks at him and he says, I have 6 kids. I could take this one in as my own and raise him. And the priest, he was a little reluctant at first, but he recognized the light in the man's eyes and handed it over to the woodcutter. And then the film ends with the woodcutter walking away from Rashomon, because I guess it was like a bridge or some type of building that really existed. So he's walking away from that, and the rain kind of ceases and the sun starts to come out, kind of giving it a more optimistic ending, and that restores the priest's faith in humanity. Alright, so that's the plot to Rashomon. I'm going to go on a break real quick, but first, here's a message from our sponsor. This podcast is brought to you by Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Here's how. It's totally free. There are tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your computer and even your cell phone. But that's not all. Anchor distributes your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many, many more. You could even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Anchor is everything you need to make a complete podcast all in one small place. So go on and download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. Okay, so now that we're back from our break, I'm going to get into my personal views on Rashomon. So, I'll start with the good. I thought that the confessions themselves, the physical, with the bandit and the wife, the villager, all of that, not the villager, woodcutter, when they're physically telling the story, bearing their witness, I think those are some of the best scenes in the movie. And it's interesting to me to think how crazy it must be to have real trials with real witnesses. That sometimes you can't believe everything you hear, right? Especially from witnesses. So I can't imagine what, detectives and police have to go through to find out the truth of things. And it seems that sometimes having more than one witness may make it all confusing and contradictory. Another thing, I think the bandit story was the best. Not because I like him as a person. He's actually pretty terrible. But Toshiro Mifune is hilarious in this movie, just like how he was in Seven Samurai. And he was just really funny at explaining the story. He's all tied up and he's laughing, kind of a little creepy, but it's pretty funny too. And he's, rolling around laughing. It's hilarious. I think his is definitely the best story. He definitely brings the needed comic relief to such an intense and, pretty dark movie. Alright, now we'll get into what I didn't like as much. So, this may be because I wasn't understanding it until pretty much the end of it. I think the structure is very hard to follow on a first viewing. To me, this feels like a movie that you need to watch at least 3 or 4 times to fully grasp what the the visuals are, what the metaphors are. It's definitely not a one and done type of thing. And and that could be just the way that Akira Kurosawa makes movies, right? Although I really liked Seven Samurai. That one was pretty easy to follow. But this was just such a complicated story. I even forgot about the other witnesses that were given in this movie. The priest even gives account. The woodcutter, like I said, he gave another account. So it was kind of hard to keep up with the story. And so when I finished watching it and when I was writing the review, I kind of had to pull it up on the plot on Wikipedia just to remind myself what actually happened, because a couple of things, the language barrier, that's on my part. I don't know Japanese, and reading subtitles can be a challenge sometimes, trying to keep up with it. And the method of the storytelling is very, very Eastern. It's not Western where there's a specific protagonist. There wasn't in this one. Not that that's a bad thing. It's just definitely won't be everyone's cup of tea. But other than that, I thought it was a solid movie, though. Even though this one was shorter than Seven Samurai, that one I also think should have been a little shorter. I think this one too. Some of the battles were drawn out a little too long. So long, so much so, I forgot which witness was being told, honestly. Like I said, I'm going to watch it more in the future. That just inspires me to want to understand it better. And if you're a cinephile, you want to check this off your 1001 Movies to Die, I recommend watching it more than once, because you're not going to fully understand and fully appreciate it on just one viewing. But overall, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. It was a pretty solid movie, hard to understand though, and I didn't think it was as accessible as Seven Samurai was. Even The Hidden Fortress seemed a little more accessible. Alright, well those are my thoughts and feelings on Rashomon. Next time I'll be discussing the next film for Classic Hollywood Week. From the king of suspense and thriller, Alfred Hitchcock, this episode is all about The Birds in 1963 starring Tippi Hedren. Alright, well until next time, this has been Surfing Through Cinema with Hawaii Harry. Take care. Thank you for listening to Surfing Through Cinema. Make sure to check us out on Facebook at Surfing Through Cinema with Hawaii Harry and on Instagram with Surfing Through Cinema. We also have a website, www.anchor.fm/Surfing Through Cinema, where you can learn more details on upcoming episodes and on past episodes.